Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, January 16th, 2026, and today we are talking about a year-round cover crop conundrum. We are embracing the progress dissenters throughout history, and it's Feedback Friday. So let's do it. All right, happy Friday to you all. Has it been a good week for you? Have all of your hopes and dreams of this January materialized so far? Still exercising, I hope, getting the body conditioned for a big spring or just, a big life. I actually have a Patreon question about exercising coming up in the near future that I'm excited to tackle, but that's for later. It's cold here with a decent amount of cold expected over the weekend, so that's fun. I got a little spoiled with those mild days, not gonna lie. That was kind of fun. Kind of, pretending that it was already spring. Oh, I wanted to say sorry for the slightly later post than usual yesterday. With the kids out of school, Mike and I decided to just have me, send him the video and he'd do the edit remotely. But the internet decided it didn't like that idea and refused to upload the file. So we had to do an emergency handoff of the video file in a parking lot, which made us feel like spy dads. And I think, added a little excitement to our otherwise cold and uneventful day. So, touche, internet. Anyway, it is Friday, which means Feedback Friday, where we explore what you all have said about this week's topics. On Monday, we did a full crop breakdown of peas and took a question about how much bug damage is too much to sell your produce. On the bug damage front, at Devin Clement wrote, quote, "I always keep my bug damage veggies for myself and sell the best looking stuff," end quote. Indeed, there is a long tradition on farms of using the seconds in the field as kitchen produce and saving the best stuff for the customers. When you sit down for a farm meal at a farm, oftentimes you will get some funky looking produce, and it will also taste better than any meal you've ever had. Also that day, I mentioned that I was reading Bill Buford's book, Among the Thugs, and at USA, O-U-S-A, wrote, quote, "Bill Buford is a wild author. Read his book Heat when I was chefing in a past life too. That led me to Among the Thugs. Thanks for all you do. It's amazing knowing someone with such similar interests and experiences is out there. Fifth year market gardener here," end quote. Thanks. And yeah, I actually read Heat back in the day too and remember loving it when I was a cook. It's a classic if you're, into the cooking thing. But interestingly, Among the Thugs has a better rating on Goodreads, which is in some ways not surprising at all. It is a really fascinating examination of crowds, of disaffected young men, of the working class in Europe and England in the 80s and 90s, of fascism, drugs, of English football. It is a wild journey. Definitely recommended. On Tuesday, we talked about if you need grow lights or heat lamps and what the pros use for their starts. Newspapers to mulch as well, and we did a little soil block along in the field. On the field demo, soil block along thing, it seems like a lot of people like that, and at very least it was tolerated by our podcast listeners, or even a few of them, like Ian at Grindstone Farms, came over to watch the demo. I plan to do a little more of that thing as they make sense and hopefully try and find ways to make it fun for the podcast listeners. There were a few specific questions and comments in there as well that I think I can address at a later date, maybe in the field, like hands-on Q&A. So if you want to go back and add questions to the comments there, maybe Mike and I can knock that out at some point. That should be fun. That day at Doug Lee asked, quote, "Why are you wearing an expensive $140 US dollars sweater while working with mud? Are you back on the bottle? Do you not have any Goodwill work clothes to wear? Hope you're doing all right," end quote. So no, not back on the bottle, going on almost 2 years sober now, and I still feel annoyingly good every single day. So I think the Patagonia hoodie, it's actually the one I'm wearing today, is actually $119, not $140, but either way, I didn't buy it. I stole it. Kidding. Several years ago, Patagonia advertised with us, and as a bonus, sent us some gear, including this particular hoodie. The idea is that it's part of their workwear, so I dutifully work in it, and it works great. Honestly, though, I work in almost everything I own eventually. That's kind of how farmer clothes work, I guess, right? We buy something maybe mildly nice for market, or quote-unquote city clothes, and eventually it gets worn out enough to work in it. In fact, I tried to explain this to Patagonia when I was there out for a separate event like a couple years ago, that farmers do not buy a lot of expensive farm clothes. Either they go to Goodwill for that, and or their regular clothes get worn down enough to eventually become their farm clothes. Maybe we buy like a work jacket or coveralls, maybe we splurge on some boots and maybe like a slick hat, but otherwise, farm wear is the retirement home of city clothes. To Patagonia's credit, they are one of the few advertisers advertisers we've ever come across that give us absolutely no expectation to wear the product in videos or anything like that. Free stuff sounds like a perk of my job, but it is mostly just a burden with companies expecting a certain number of posts or mentions, even if you don't like the product. And we accept very, very little free stuff anymore for that reason. Patagonia was a cool exception. They just said that they like what we're doing and wanted to offer some gear and support. So shouts to that, and I will happily wear your clothing into oblivion. On Wednesday, we had Jamie from Old North Farm on to talk about the transition from professional cook to farmer, as well as some tips for selling to chefs. And no surprise that episode was met with several positive comments. At Philiflom wrote, quote, "What a great episode. I love the part about growing food just to give away to the community. For years, I've dreamed about asking my city if they'd like to start a program where we utilize unused city land to do a small farm specifically to feed the homeless populations of my area, of which there are ample amounts, but I just don't know how to start. Maybe even have the availability to pay locals for day labor that they'd like to do. Less profit drive, more a way to provide food and employment for the down and out," end quote. Yeah, I love that idea. And there is plenty of examples of that sort of thing and plenty of room for that sort of stuff out there. Where there's a will, there's a way, as they say, I suppose. But feeding people who can't normally afford our food is always a challenge that many of us care about. It's difficult finding the balance where you earn enough money to keep these things in business, but also provide food in that way. So I loved hearing about how Old North has used underutilized farmland to help facilitate that idea. Very cool stuff, and big shouts to Jamie for coming on. Then on Thursday, we covered just a whole slew of topics. One of them was alfalfa pellets, and at Stephen Rogers wrote, quote, "Alfalfa pellets probably won't be any slower to decompose and release their nutrients than using meal. What you are somehow missing is that the pellets completely fall apart into the meal as soon as they get wet. Giving them a quick shot of water after spreading them does the trick," end quote. And I think that's fair. They definitely sort of unpelletize pretty fast. I suppose the assumption I'm making, because there's no, specific studies that I can find on the differences in, how long it takes for them to release their nutrients into the soil versus meal, is that the little mounds of alfalfa will take longer to consume by microbes than the fine spread out meal. But the other advantage that I didn't really mention about pellets is just the ease of spreading them. Alfalfa meal, by contrast, cannot be easily spread in even mildly windy weather. I mean, it will spread it just like, everywhere. I also that day took a question about sod netting, and at Dave J wrote, quote, "The first step I would suggest is not doing anything to collect sod netting. Tarp the area and kill the grass first, then use a hard garden rake to scratch the first inch or two of soil attempting to lift the fabric out of the ground," end quote. Thanks, and that idea could also possibly work. I don't know that there is any guarantee it would be necessarily easier to remove after the tarping, but if you have a tarp and the time, you could try it. Anyway, great stuff as always this week, friends. You rock. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, a year-round cover crop and solarization conundrum for you. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a proud supporter of Growers Daily. At Johnny's, they do more than sell seeds. They grow them. They trial them to see how they perform on Johnny's research farm in Maine and across the U.S. and Canada. Only the best varieties are added to their catalog and website. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seedling to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. JohnnySeeds.com. That's JohnnySeeds.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Ohio Earth Food. So you got your soil tested or need your soil tested, it's time to contact Ohio Earth Food. Since 1972, they have been growers' trusted source for organic soil amendments to apply before you plant to prevent those deficiency symptoms that limit production. Their knowledgeable staff have all been a part of certified organic operations and can help you choose the best products for your soil and deliver or ship them right to your farm. With locations in Northwest Ohio and just north of Madison, Wisconsin, Ohio Earth Food wants to be your partner for organic inputs. Don't count on luck this year. Start your seeds in the Seed Catapult potting soil and put their Revita fertilizers in your beds, and rest assured that your plants will have all the nutrients, stimulants, and energy for whatever comes their way. Feed your soil and let your soil feed the plants. Visit them at ohioearthfood.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Hanmad, who writes, quote, "Hey Jesse, I'm writing from Zone 5B, currently reading your book, by the way, love it. I live in a suburban area and for the last couple years have been slowly replacing my massive lawn with pollinator habitat. Now that I've got that going, I'm planning on getting some garden beds started in the spring. I've got some back issues, so I'm planning on building raised beds. Between what I've read in your book so far and other materials, I really like the idea of resting a bed followed by occultation or solarization. What I'm thinking is to select one bed to plant with a cover crop that will be left to grow for a year, so I'll have 3 beds producing food while one bed is quote-unquote resting. Then the following year, mow down the cover crop and cover with a polycarbonate board for solarization. Polycarbonate board so that I can use it over and over, less plastic being shed into the environment, and thinking it'll need to be covering the bed for a shorter period of time. Planning the design so that there is some vents so that I don't make an anaerobic environment." They go on, "Once the cover crop is killed off, then plant the bed and select another bed to rest and continue the rotation on. Do you think this would be a reasonable method?" Another question I have is, what do you think would be good cover crops to plant on the resting beds? My immediate thought was white clover along with a couple other plants. Looking forward to hearing what you think. Thanks a bunch, end quote. Okay then, fun question here, and bummer about the back issues. I know that feeling pretty well. Some good yoga stretches and a monthly trip to the chiropractor have been helpful for me, but like I said in the intro today, more on that later. All right, so cover cropping a bed for a full season and then using polycarbonate to terminate it. That's an interesting idea, and I don't think I've heard of anyone using polycarbonate. That's like what you see on the front of greenhouses. It's kind of that thick sheets of plastic. I don't think I've heard of that before. They come in 4x8 sheets, so in theory, you could build the beds in such a way as to have it fit directly into your beds, which is kind of neat. Like you could just slot it right into it, but whether or not it would have the desired results is a bit of a different question. First, in order for it to be effective in solarizing the soil, I would avoid the vents. Otherwise, it becomes kind of a solar oven, dehydrating your soil. Or in the best case scenario, stuff gets supercharged by the heat and grows strong, which is also not really what you want. Anytime clear plastic is applied to the soil surface, the duration of that application should really only be a couple weeks tops, so as not to negatively impact soil life. So with that short of a time period, any anaerobic pockets that could be created won't really be a long-term issue. With the polycarbonate, it would be hard to lock in the sides enough to adequately do the trick, I'm afraid. Though, again, if the construction is spot on, it could fit rather snugly. In general, I'm not a huge solarization fan, only because it can be harder to control than occultation, and it can awaken weed seeds deeper in the soil. At least that's been my experience. On the cover crop side, clovers can work, but you'll need to mow it to keep the seeds down. The issue with cover cropping for a full year is that there are very few crops that will do well for a full year. Like everything has its season, right? Even perennials like clover and alfalfa will die back at some point during the season, at which point they can get weedy. Best bet is to have a plan to plant one spring crop, like perhaps like sorghum Sudan grass or something, then a late summer one, perhaps something like cowpeas or teff, and then a winter one, perhaps something like winter rye and vetch for winter hardy cover crops, or field peas for winter kill cover crops. That, of course, would require more management, but what you don't want is weeds taking over your fallow beds in the heat of the summer when the clover takes a siesta. Anyway, I hope that was a little bit helpful. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we dissent. Be right back. Maybe. Today's episode is brought to you by High Mowing Organic Seeds. High Mowing Organic Seeds is celebrating their 30th anniversary with 48 fabulous new varieties for 2026. Highlights include downy mildew-resistant cucumbers, a poppy that looks like cotton candy, and 12 new tomato varieties. High Mowing offers more than 750 varieties of certified organic, non-GMO vegetables, flowers, herbs, and cover crops, all trialed for optimal performance in organic growing systems. High Mowing has the professional quality seeds and supportive grower reps to get you from seed to harvest. Visit highmowingseeds.com to request a catalog and use code 26NOTILL, all caps, for 10% off your order of $100 or more. That's highmowingseeds.com. All right, back to the show. All right, so I've been thinking about the idea of dissent lately, of differing in or not conforming to popular opinion, especially when it comes to, things that feel inevitable. I'll explain. Several years ago, I remember reading this 1987 essay by Wendell Berry called Why I Am Not Going to Buy a Computer. In it, Berry explains that as an activist against coal mines, he could not in good conscience support a tool that requires more energy, but he feels like it's being forced onto him, onto everyone. He writes, quote, "I do not see that computers are bringing us one step nearer to anything that does matter to me: peace, economic justice, ecological health, political honesty, family and community stability, good work," end quote. The computers were coming, but Berry was saying he does not see their value like others do, and in fact, quite the opposite. He felt like they were antithetical to his values. Now, I bring this story up because obviously we are in a technological revolution of sorts with AI and automation. These tools represent a significant society-altering leap in technology. Through every technological revolution, however, there are voices like Berry on computers who say, do we actually need or actually want this? And for the most part, that little dissent seems silly or quaint now with computers so ubiquitous. Or, and I know this is a story that I brought up a few times lately, I think back to this story I heard about a shopkeeper like 100-ish years ago who was bemoaning the growing popularity of telephones and what they would do to the relationships he had with his customers for them to just call him instead of coming in. No one would debate that computers or phones haven't also done some good. However, the shopkeeper was also not wrong. They probably did lose some connection with their customers. Maybe we kept up with relatives better by using the telephone or computers or whatever, but we did lose connections to communities by embracing these things. Or like with computers, did we exploit the earth more in order to be able to write faster? The technology that replaced the horse, cars for another example, was an incredible feat of ingenuity. Simultaneously, it's part of what put the Parisian market gardeners out of business. Without abundant horse manure, they could no longer operate as intensively, and thus food had to travel further to get into the city. And I'm not saying there weren't some environmental benefits to moving on from horses, but that the energy and enthusiasm went into an industry that caused just as many problems, if not more, instead of solving the problems brought by the horses. My point, I suppose, is that there is a long history of technological innovation, but a much quieter history of reasonable dissent against this innovation, against this sort of quote-unquote progress. Often those voices are shamed or disregarded, but that doesn't mean they were entirely wrong. People have stood against every technology and mostly been written off, and I wonder if at some point that dissent doesn't need to be heard and heeded, especially with something like AI, which mark me among the people who think we, or at least the average person, does not actually benefit from access to this technology, especially in comparison to the harm it will bring. Especially with AI, we are entering a world where we are told we need it or that it's inevitable. In fact, the other day I was having this conversation with a friend who was, talking really positively about how AI could, for instance, potentially create content for content creators. They could, set their AI agent to task and it would take care of the rest while the creator did other things. But my thought was, okay, but who wants that? Who would watch that? Who actually wants that product? Not me, not most people. I don't need something that's created by AI that just aggregates all this information from other people without even paying those people. It was clear in that conversation, and it's clear just in general that people don't really think about that. Tech gurus get excited about the first one-person billion-dollar company, basically a company which is run mostly by AI agents, and then just maybe has one owner. And again, what customer wants that? Who is buying that product? We are sold these ideas and dreams because dreams are more profitable and easier to craft than realities. However, the dissenters throughout history are the ones who simply ask that question of do we want or need this? And the adopters are largely those who, intoxicated by the dream prospects, refused to question what will be lost. Or better yet, ask themselves if it gets them any closer to what they actually want for themselves, for their future, for their children, for the world. I've said it before, and I can hear the arguments for AI in terms of its place in medicine, science, etc. But what happens to art, to writing, to jobs, to music, to society as a whole when we remove all that work, when you can just type into a search bar, draw me a picture of a cat, instead of learning to draw a cat, instead of seeing all the intricate shades that make a cat look like a cat or fur look like fur. Now, it is not lost on me that I use a computer, that I use a camera, that I am definitely in the system. But so was Barry with his fancy pen and paper, the typewriter that his wife would use to edit his work. The difference between the dissenters and the embracers isn't that they're perfect. It's that the dissenters see a vision for what they want for the world. For me, a more ecological, environmental, healthier world. And weigh that against the technological progress forced upon them. They're willing to look silly in history to at least try and say, do we need this though? Can we first at least make what we have now better, more sustainable? So I guess that's me, and hopefully maybe you, saying that we don't really need this energy-intensive technology, taking farmlands and jobs, doing our art for us. Maybe this time let's try and put that money and energy into the soil, into fixing the problems all the other technologies that we have embraced have caused, the problems that we were warned about and then laughed off as a society. Anyway, I challenge myself sometimes here to articulate these random things that are sort of banging around in my head, but I also lean on you all to help critique and refine them. So I look forward to your thoughts and musings over the weekend. Otherwise, speaking of, let's start that weekend and say good night, lamp, good night, moon, good night, Friday, see you soon. Also, good night, moon is a literary masterpiece. Just needs to be said. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and also my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of January, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Kyle Richardville, Patrick Weaver, Alex and Oliver, Bill King, Chris Yates, and Ian at Grindstone Farms. Shouts to you all. These are our beneficials and our Sunlight supporters, keeping this thing rolling. All right, so Max, junior at the farm high school, is excited about the potluck that they do every week because that's when he gets to see Sophia. Sophia does not go to his school. She lives in the city with her parents, but she's curious about the school and loves to ask questions and hang out with Max. And sure enough, Sophia is there when Max arrives, and they share a smile and a laugh and sit down at a table together to chat. Max tells Sophia all about his week, about the fire management techniques they were learning, about the history class. Sophia remarks on the history of the farmer decline, how bleak that sounds, how wild the idea of a supercharged rust-infecting technology is. And just then, her cell phone chimes. Everyone laughs and looks at her. Sorry, she says, I thought I turned it off. And Max smiles. She's charming. And Sophia says, well, I'm glad there are people like you here doing this school. Who knows? We may need you one day. Let you think on that. Thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you on Monday. Bye.